Have you ever stopped to wonder whether something as ordinary as the clothes you wear to church could reveal something much deeper about your faith? Across Catholic churches around the world, a quiet change has been taking place for years. It did not happen overnight, and it did not arrive with loud debate or public controversy. Instead, it slowly became part of everyday life until most people barely noticed it. Yet if you stood near the entrance of almost any Catholic parish on a Sunday morning and carefully watched people as they entered for Holy Mass, you might discover that what appears to be a simple matter of clothing actually points to a much greater spiritual question. According to the perspective shared in this message, this is not ultimately about fashion, trends, personal taste, or social expectations. It is about how Catholics understand the Holy Mass, the real presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist, and what it truly means to stand before Almighty God. The saddest part, the speaker argues, is that many faithful Catholics are not making these choices out of rebellion or disrespect. They simply have never been taught differently. Many have never heard a priest clearly explain from the pulpit that what a person wears to Mass carries spiritual significance. They have never been told that clothing is not spiritually neutral, that it can communicate reverence or indifference, and that the Church has consistently spoken about the importance of approaching sacred worship with dignity. That is why this conversation matters. It may challenge assumptions that have become normal in modern culture. It may even make some listeners uncomfortable. But sometimes discomfort is the first sign that truth is inviting us to examine ourselves more honestly. Throughout Christian history, moments of genuine conversion have often begun when people allowed themselves to confront difficult truths, rather than immediately dismissing them. Before discussing clothing itself, however, we first need to understand the place where Catholics are going every Sunday. Because from this perspective, the question of how we dress is really a question about what we believe. At its deepest level, the issue is not about appearance at all. It is about faith in the real presence of Jesus Christ. The Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches, and sacred scripture supports, that during every valid celebration of the Holy Mass, when a validly ordained priest pronounces the words of consecration, the bread and wine are truly changed into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to Catholic doctrine, this is not merely symbolic language or a meaningful reminder of Christ's sacrifice. It is not simply a memorial designed to inspire believers, nor is it a poetic metaphor meant to encourage spiritual reflection. It is presented as an objective reality at the very heart of the Catholic faith. This teaching was solemnly defined at the Council of Trent, reaffirmed during the Second Vatican Council, and faithfully preserved throughout the history of the Church from its earliest centuries. If this belief is true, then everything about entering a Catholic church changes. Walking through those doors means entering into the presence of the King of Kings. It means stepping into a place where the Creator of heaven and earth, the eternal Word made flesh, the one through whom all creation continues to exist, is truly and substantially present. This understanding naturally affects every aspect of our behavior. It influences how we speak inside the Church. It shapes the silence we maintain. It explains why Catholics genuflect before the tabernacle. And according to this message, it should also influence how we prepare ourselves outwardly, including the clothing we choose to wear. Consider how people prepare for important moments in ordinary life. Imagine receiving an invitation to meet a respected head of state or a beloved monarch. Think about the care diplomats take when presenting official credentials before a national leader. Think about the elegant clothing worn at weddings, graduation ceremonies, military award presentations, or other occasions where honor and dignity are expected. In every one of these situations, people understand that their appearance communicates respect. They are not dressing simply for comfort or convenience. Their clothing becomes an outward expression of the importance of the event and of the person standing before them. It silently declares that this occasion deserves preparation, attention, and honor. If human beings naturally understand this principle when meeting earthly leaders or participating in important public ceremonies, then the message asks an even more challenging question. What does it say about our faith if we enter the presence of the King of Heaven, dressed no differently than we would for an ordinary shopping trip, a casual afternoon, or a quick errand? According to this perspective, such choices may unintentionally reveal something about what we truly believe concerning Christ's presence in the Eucharist. Imagine walking into church wearing flip-flops, athletic shorts, sleeveless shirts, clothing that is torn, stained, excessively revealing, or so casual that it would barely be considered appropriate for a moderately formal dinner with friends. The speaker argues that such choices raise an uncomfortable but important question. If we genuinely believed we were standing before Almighty God, would we prepare ourselves in exactly the same way? The concern expressed here is not merely about appearances, but about whether our external actions reflect our internal convictions. According to this viewpoint, if someone truly recognized that the tabernacle contains the living presence of Jesus Christ, that awareness would naturally influence how they approach the sacred liturgy. No one who sincerely believed they were entering the presence of the Lord of the universe would intentionally dress as though they were making a routine stop at the supermarket. Yet, according to the message, scenes like this have become increasingly common in parish after parish across the Catholic world. At this point, however, an important distinction must be made because fairness requires precision. This discussion is not directed toward those who have very little. It is not criticizing the poor man or woman whose limited wardrobe contains only modest, clean clothing that has been carefully prepared out of love for God. A widow wearing a simple but well-kept dress, lovingly pressed despite years of use, offers something beautiful through her reverence. Nor is this directed toward the worker who receives an unexpected emergency call on Sunday morning and comes directly from work because missing Mass would be unthinkable. God knows every heart and every circumstance. He sees sacrifices that others never notice. Those situations are completely different from what is being discussed here. Instead, the concern focuses on deliberate choices made when better options are available. It addresses the growing cultural attitude that says God is satisfied with whatever we happen to feel like wearing because, after all, He only looks at the heart. While it is certainly true that God sees the heart, the message argues that this truth is often misunderstood or applied in an incomplete way. Our hearts are revealed through our actions. Our priorities become visible through the decisions we make. Clothing is one of those decisions. Whether we intend it or not, the way we prepare ourselves for Mass communicates something about the importance we place on the encounter that awaits us. A person may sincerely claim to love someone deeply, but if that love is never reflected in their actions, those words begin to lose their meaning. Imagine a husband who constantly tells his wife that she is precious to him, yet repeatedly humiliates her in public or treats her carelessly in front of others. His heart cannot be separated from his behavior, because genuine love always seeks visible expression. The same principle applies to our relationship with God. Reverence is not merely an emotion hidden within the soul. It naturally reveals itself through the choices we make, the habits we form, and even the way we prepare ourselves before entering into worship. According to the long tradition of the Catholic Church, clothing worn at Mass is one of those visible expressions of interior devotion. For nearly 2,000 years, Catholic teaching has consistently emphasized that modesty and reverence in dress belong within sacred worship. This has never been presented as a passing cultural preference or an outdated social custom. Rather, it has been understood as part of the respect owed to places that have been set apart for God. Canon law itself reflects this concern by directing that churches should remain places where reverence, order, and piety are carefully maintained. The great theologian St. Thomas Aquinas also explains that the outward actions of worship help form the inward life of the believer. Human beings are not pure spirits. We worship with both body and soul. Because of this, external acts, kneeling, bowing, making the sign of the cross, and even clothing ourselves appropriately, help lead the heart toward deeper devotion. According to this understanding, preparing our bodies for worship is itself an act of religion. It becomes one more way of honoring God before a single prayer has even been spoken. When those exterior signs are neglected without serious reason, something important is lost. The issue is not simply about following a dress code. It is about whether our outward behavior supports or contradicts the sacred reality we claim to believe. This naturally leads to the virtue that the Church has traditionally called modesty. Today, many people hear that word and immediately reduce it to only one issue: avoiding sexually provocative clothing. While that certainly forms part of the discussion, the classical Catholic understanding is much richer and much broader. According to St. Thomas Aquinas and the long tradition of Christian moral teaching, modesty is the virtue that governs our entire outward presentation so that it reflects both our own dignity and the dignity of the occasion in which we find ourselves. In other words, modesty asks whether our appearance is appropriate for who we are and where we are. For Catholics, the answer begins with identity. Through baptism, every Christian becomes a child of God, redeemed through the sacrifice of Christ, and called to holiness. Then there is the place itself. Every Sunday, Catholics enter the house of God, where the Blessed Sacrament is reserved, and where the holy sacrifice of the Mass is celebrated. If those two realities are true, then modesty calls believers to present themselves in a way that reflects both their dignity as children of God and the holiness of the place they are entering. From this perspective, Two broad categories of clothing become morally problematic when worn deliberately to Mass. The first includes clothing that is genuinely immodest. The second includes clothing that, while not necessarily revealing, communicates deliberate carelessness, disrespect, or indifference toward the sacred nature of worship. Both deserve careful consideration because they involve different moral concerns. Beginning with immodest clothing, the message argues that garments become morally inappropriate when they expose the body in ways that are clearly unsuitable for the sacred setting and that may become occasions of temptation for others. Consider, for example, clothing with extremely low necklines, very short hemlines, garments that cling so tightly to the body that little is left to the imagination, or styles specifically designed to draw attention toward physical appearance rather than toward prayer. According to the perspective presented here, such choices do more than reflect personal taste. They affect the entire worshiping community. The concern is that they introduce unnecessary distractions into the very place where people have gathered to focus entirely upon God. Human beings naturally respond to what they see, and the Church has long recognized that charity includes avoiding actions that unnecessarily lead others into temptation. From this point of view, dressing immodestly inside a church becomes not only a matter of personal modesty, but also an issue of love for one's neighbor. It risks pulling the attention of fellow worshipers away from prayer and directing their thoughts elsewhere during the most sacred moments of the liturgy. The message further argues that such choices also fail to honor the dignity of the Lord whose presence fills the church and ultimately diminish the dignity of the person wearing them, since modesty protects rather than exploits the gift of the human body. The same principle, however, is not reserved exclusively for women. It applies equally to men. A man who deliberately comes to Mass shirtless, in extremely short shorts, or in clothing intended to emphasize his body in provocative ways, commits the same basic offense against modesty. The virtue belongs to every Christian, because every human body has been created in the image and likeness of God, redeemed through Christ, and destined one day for resurrection and glory. Since the body itself is sacred, presenting it carelessly or immodestly before the Blessed Sacrament fails to honor the gift God has given. The second category may appear less obvious, yet according to this message it has become even more widespread in modern Catholic life. This concerns clothing that is technically modest, but intentionally careless. Imagine someone choosing perfectly decent clothing, not because it reflects reverence for the Mass, but simply because they could not be bothered to make any special effort. Consider the man who attends Sunday worship wearing the same outfit he used while mowing the lawn, not because an emergency prevented him from changing, but because he simply decided that the occasion was not important enough to deserve additional preparation. Or the woman who selects whatever happens to be closest at hand without giving even a moment's thought to where she is about to go. According to the speaker, these decisions silently communicate a message. They suggest, whether consciously or unconsciously, that standing before the Lord of heaven and earth is not worth a little extra time or attention. They imply that the one present in the tabernacle does not deserve 15 additional minutes spent preparing with care. The message argues that this casual attitude did not arise by accident. It reflects a much deeper theological problem that has gradually spread throughout Catholic culture over recent decades, a weakening of the sense of the sacred. There was a time, not many generations ago, when Catholics instinctively distinguished Sunday from every other day of the week. Their clothing reflected that difference. Women frequently covered their heads in church, following the practice described by St. Paul in his first letter to the Corinthians, where he speaks about women praying with their heads covered as a visible sign of reverence before God. Men removed their hats, wore their finest available clothing, and conducted themselves with a seriousness that matched what they believed was taking place upon the altar. Parents taught their children from the earliest years that Sunday Mass stood above every other activity in the week. They learned that preparing for church was not simply another family routine, but part of preparing to meet God Himself. According to the message, this tradition was never rooted in vanity or social competition. Catholics did not dress carefully because they wished to impress one another. They did so because they believed. Their belief in the real presence naturally shaped the way they prepared both body and soul for the greatest encounter of the week. According to the message, the gradual disappearance of reverent dress at Holy Mass is not the original cause of today's crisis of faith within the Church. Rather, it is one of its most visible symptoms. At the same time, it also becomes part of the problem because what we do externally eventually shapes what we believe internally. Human beings are not divided into separate compartments where actions have no effect upon convictions. The outward and inward dimensions of life constantly influence one another. When an entire parish gradually adopts an atmosphere of extreme casualness, people slowly begin to think differently about the sacred realities they are participating in. The relaxed appearance of the congregation subtly reinforces a relaxed understanding of the Mass itself. Over time, this creates generations of Catholics who genuinely struggle to understand why reverence in dress should matter at all. They have never experienced a culture that consistently taught otherwise. The visible signs that once helped form their understanding have quietly disappeared, and with them, an important element of Catholic formation has faded as well. That is why, from the perspective of this message, recovering reverent dress is not a minor issue or an unnecessary distraction from more important concerns. It forms part of the larger effort to rebuild Catholic culture by restoring visible reminders of the sacred. Every family that intentionally prepares for Sunday Mass with dignity makes a quiet but powerful statement without speaking a single word. Parents who encourage their children to dress respectfully are already teaching theology before the first reading begins. Their appearance silently proclaims that this place is different from every other place. It tells children that this moment is unlike any other moment during the week. It communicates that they are about to stand in the presence of God. Over the years, these repeated actions become habits, and those habits shape character. They form souls long before children are capable of explaining complex theological doctrines. The Church has always understood the educational power of external signs. This is one reason why Catholic liturgy gives such careful attention to visible acts of worship. Incense rising toward heaven, sacred vestments worn by priests and deacons, the ordered movements of the ministers around the altar, the beauty of sacred music, and the careful celebration of every liturgical gesture all serve a purpose beyond aesthetics. They teach the faithful through the senses. They communicate truths that words alone cannot fully express. Every visible sign helps lead the worshiper toward a deeper awareness of the mystery unfolding before them. At this point, many people naturally ask an important question. Does dressing casually for Mass actually become sinful, or is it simply considered poor etiquette? The message answers this question by turning to the principles of Catholic moral theology. It distinguishes carefully between different kinds of situations, rather than treating every circumstance as identical. When clothing is genuinely immodest, the answer is presented as relatively straightforward. Immodest dress already conflicts with the virtue of modesty in ordinary public life. Bringing that same immodesty into the sacred setting of the Holy Mass adds another dimension, because it also fails to honor the virtue of religion, the virtue that governs humanity's proper relationship with God. Catholic moral theology traditionally teaches that a mortal sin requires three conditions: grave matter, full knowledge, and deliberate consent. According to the speaker, when someone fully understands the Church's teaching regarding modesty and knowingly chooses to ignore it by wearing clearly immodest clothing to Mass, those conditions may be fulfilled. The discussion then moves to a different category: clothing that is not revealing but simply careless or intentionally disrespectful. Here, the moral evaluation becomes more nuanced. Much depends upon the person's knowledge, intentions, and circumstances. Someone who has never been taught these principles, who sincerely believes they are acting appropriately, or who is simply doing the best they can with the clothing available to them, bears much less personal responsibility than someone who understands the issue clearly, but dismisses it out of indifference. Even so, the message argues that the objective mismatch between casual clothing and the sacredness of the occasion still exists, even when personal guilt may be reduced through ignorance. This is precisely why proper formation remains so important. Once someone has genuinely encountered this teaching and understands its reasoning, the situation changes. Ignorance can no longer be claimed in the same way. Future choices become conscious decisions, carrying whatever moral responsibility accompanies them. The speaker therefore encourages listeners not to ignore these questions, but to reflect honestly upon them, recognizing that growth in faith often begins when previously unnoticed areas of life are brought into the light. The message also reminds viewers that participation in the Holy Mass is never purely individual. Catholics do not worship as isolated believers, disconnected from everyone around them. They gather as members of the body of Christ, and because of that, each person's actions influence the wider community. Every parish gradually develops its own culture, and newcomers inevitably learn from what they observe. Someone returning to the faith after many years away, a visitor attending Mass for the first time, or a child growing up within the parish, will all absorb lessons from the environment surrounding them. When a congregation consistently dresses with visible reverence and modesty, it silently teaches that something extraordinary is taking place. Without anyone delivering a sermon, the community itself becomes a living form of catechesis. On the other hand, if a parish begins to resemble a beach gathering, a sporting event, or an ordinary weekend social activity, it unintentionally communicates a very different message. Week after week, people absorb the impression that this place is no more sacred than anywhere else. According to the speaker, repeated exposure to that atmosphere gradually weakens awareness of the mystery at the heart of the Mass. To illustrate this principle, the message points to the example of St. John Vianney, the beloved curé of Ars and patron saint of parish priests. He became famous not only for his holiness, but also for his unwavering insistence that God's house should always reflect profound reverence. He tirelessly taught his parishioners that the church building deserved respect in behavior, conversation, clothing, and every outward gesture, because it belonged to God alone. Although his parish was poor by worldly standards, its deep reverence became one of the reasons it was transformed into a place of remarkable spiritual vitality. Pilgrims traveled from across Europe to seek his guidance, attracted by the unmistakable holiness that radiated from that small village church. According to the message, this historical example demonstrates that exterior reverence is not merely symbolic. It helps cultivate the interior transformation that every Christian seeks. The visible and invisible dimensions of worship were never meant to compete with one another. They were designed to work together, each strengthening the other as believers grow in faith and devotion. With all of this in mind, the message now turns away from theory and toward a practical response. If something you have heard has challenged your thinking, the goal is not to leave you weighed down by guilt or trapped in discouragement. Authentic Christian conversion has never been about despair. It begins with gratitude for the grace that opens our eyes, followed by the willingness to respond. Every believer has the opportunity to make simple but meaningful changes. One practical suggestion offered here is to prepare your clothing for Sunday Mass the evening before, instead of making a rushed decision at the last moment. Taking just a few minutes to consider what you will wear can become part of your spiritual preparation. As you look at your clothes, ask yourself a few honest questions. Does this outfit truly honor the Lord whose presence I am about to enter? Am I offering him my best within the circumstances of my life? Is what I have chosen modest, respectful, clean, and appropriate for standing in the house of God? If the answer is no, then choose something else. If you find yourself uncertain, the message encourages you to choose the path of greater reverence rather than less. Few people ever regret making a greater effort to honor God, but many may one day wish they had approached him with deeper respect. None of these suggestions are presented as acts of empty legalism or rigid formalism. Rather, they are offered as practical expressions of love. Love naturally seeks ways to show itself, and thoughtful preparation becomes one of those quiet expressions that often goes unnoticed by everyone except God. In this understanding, every Sunday morning offers another opportunity to prepare not only the heart, but also the whole person for the greatest encounter of the week. The responsibility becomes even greater for parents because they serve as the primary teachers of the faith within the home. Long before children understand theology, they learn through observation. They watch how their parents prepare for Mass, how seriously they speak about Sunday worship, and whether their actions match the beliefs they profess. According to this message, what parents teach their children about clothing for Mass will influence how those children understand the Eucharist for many years to come. When parents consistently explain that Sunday is different from every other day, they are helping their sons and daughters recognize that the Mass is unlike any other gathering. Dressing carefully for church becomes more than simply putting on nicer clothes. It becomes part of prayer itself. The act of preparing outwardly begins preparing the heart inwardly. As children grow, these repeated experiences quietly shape their understanding of God, reverence, and worship. Even if they do not immediately appreciate these lessons, the formation they receive during childhood often bears fruit much later in life. Seeds planted faithfully have a way of growing when the time is right. Grace is never wasted. Every effort made to teach reverence today may influence decisions years or even decades into the future, often in ways parents themselves may never fully witness. For young people especially, the message offers an encouraging reminder. The Church's teaching on modesty and reverence should not be dismissed as an outdated custom left behind by earlier generations or as an unnecessary restriction imposed by religion. Instead, it is presented as a liberating truth that protects the dignity of every human person. Modern culture frequently measures worth according to physical attractiveness, popularity, or the attention someone can attract from others. The Christian message points in a completely different direction. It teaches that every person possesses immeasurable value simply because they have been created by God, loved into existence, and redeemed through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. That dignity does not need to be earned, displayed, or proven through outward appearance. It already exists because God Himself has bestowed it. Therefore, clothing should reflect that dignity, rather than compete against it. The speaker encourages believers to dress like people who know who they truly are, children of God, redeemed by the blood of Christ, and preparing to receive the King of Heaven in Holy Communion. The message then returns once more to the heart of the Catholic faith, the miracle that takes place during every Holy Mass. According to Catholic teaching, whenever believers receive Holy Communion worthily, they receive not merely a symbol or reminder, but the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ Himself. The Creator of the universe enters into intimate communion with His people in a mystery that surpasses complete human understanding. Every aspect of preparation leading up to that moment therefore carries significance. The clothing chosen for Mass, the 1-hour Eucharistic fast observed beforehand, the examination of conscience, and the willingness to seek the sacrament of reconciliation whenever serious sin has separated a person from God, are all presented as visible signs of love rather than burdensome obligations. They are not arbitrary rules imposed to make worship more difficult. Instead, they become ways of telling God, even before receiving Him, that this encounter matters, that time has been intentionally set aside, and that He is worthy of thoughtful preparation. The message urges believers not to approach what it describes as the greatest event in the universe with indifference. Just as no bridegroom would intentionally appear at his own wedding wearing pajamas, Christians are encouraged not to approach the Lord casually or carelessly. Instead, they are invited to become people whose outward appearance reflects the love already present within their hearts. Beauty in dress is not encouraged for the sake of vanity, competition, or attracting admiration from others. It is encouraged as an offering of love directed toward God alone. Entering the church with this attitude transforms every action. Walking through the doors, approaching the pew, kneeling before the tabernacle, and preparing to receive Holy Communion all become visible expressions of adoration flowing from genuine faith. According to the message, this is ultimately what reverent dress seeks to communicate. Not pride in appearance, but humility before the living God who lovingly waits for His people in the Blessed Sacrament. The Christian faith has never promised comfort above all else. From the very beginning, following Christ has required sacrifice, discipline, and the willingness to live differently from the surrounding culture. Jesus Himself spoke of the narrow path that leads to life, reminding His followers that it would not always be the easiest road to travel. Yet within that challenge lies extraordinary beauty. The Catholic faith has always sought to sanctify every part of ordinary life, teaching that even the smallest daily choices can become acts of worship when they are offered to God with love. According to the message, choosing what to wear on a Sunday morning is one of those seemingly ordinary decisions that can carry deep spiritual meaning. Preparing respectfully for Mass is not simply about selecting nicer clothes. It is about allowing faith to shape every area of life, beginning in the heart and extending outward into visible actions. Genuine belief naturally expresses itself through conduct. When someone truly recognizes the privilege of entering the house of God and standing before the Lord present in the Blessed Sacrament, that conviction gradually transforms the way they prepare, the way they pray, the way they behave, and even the way they dress. In this understanding, faith is never confined to private thoughts hidden inside the mind. It becomes something that others can quietly recognize through a life ordered toward God. The invitation offered throughout this message is therefore simple but demanding. Believe completely, live consistently, and allow your outward life to reflect the reality of your inward faith. Let your actions declare what your lips profess. Let every part of your preparation for Mass become another expression of gratitude for the gift of Christ's presence. If this message has prompted you to reflect more deeply, if it has challenged long-held assumptions, or if it has encouraged you to reconsider how you approach the Holy Mass, then do not allow that moment of reflection to end here. Share these ideas with someone who may benefit from hearing them. Conversations about faith often begin with a single person choosing to speak with kindness and conviction. Leave a comment describing how this message has affected your thinking and what practical step you intend to take moving forward. As a simple expression of commitment, write the words, "I will honor you, Lord," as a reminder that worship involves offering our whole selves, body, mind, and soul to God whenever we enter His house. If these reflections have strengthened your understanding of the Catholic faith, consider subscribing so you can continue receiving future messages that encourage spiritual growth and deeper reflection on the teachings of the Church. You can also support the spread of this message by liking and sharing the video, helping it reach others who may be searching for guidance or encouragement in their own walk of faith. Every act of evangelization, no matter how small it may seem, has the potential to touch a